Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, a lot of us who were not following the trial closely, who thought it was probably a cut and dried issue, given that these four were on camera, plenty of video evidence of what they did on the day. They basically admitted doing the actual deeds of which they were accused, but insisted it was not a crime. What was the defence that you mounted on their behalf?
Our clients never disputed their part in bringing down the statue and rolling it into the harbour, but they relied on justification. Our clients said that they believed they had the consent of the people of Bristol to bring the statue down, that the statue itself was offensive and was causing harm, and that they were preventing a crime by bringing it down. And the final thing that we asked the jury to consider was whether, based on the actions of our clients and the long history in relation to this statue, a conviction would be proportionate.
It's fascinating, this idea they were preventing a crime. Basically, it was a hate crime for people having to walk past this statue of this hateful man, is the argument.
Yes.
Now, there had been petitions, there had been attempts to get the statue removed, and again, I'm perfectly in favour of people going through democratic processes to argue for removal of statues if that's what they want. I'm personally of the view that we shouldn't try and rewrite our past. I would be very much in favour of if there's going to be a statue to someone who's committed what would be heinous crimes against humanity in our midst, then I would like a plaque to say, look, this guy wasn't. Yes, he was a philanthropist, but only because he sold human beings, and that's how he made his money. I think that personally would be a better way of going about it. But what evidence did the four have, and you, the lawyers, have, that these people represented the view of the people of Bristol, and that there were people walking past this statue day in, day out, who considered themselves victims of hate crime?
Well, I think we have to look at the public statements that were given by various people after the statue was brought down. Superintendent Andy Bennett said on the day of the protest that perhaps it was time for Bristol that the statue came down. Mayor Marvin Rees said he was glad it had come down and described the statue as abhorrent. We heard at trial from the former Lord Mayor Cleo Lake of the pain and harm that she felt seeing that statue in its place, because the statue was part of a bigger picture. It was part of a celebration of a man who made much of his wealth from the trafficking and death of people from Africa.
I mean, to be fair, a few people, even very prominent people like that, don't necessarily represent all of the people of Bristol. But there is a very big difference for me between people, I don't think anyone in their right mind is saying they think that he was a good man and what he did was okay, either then or now, or perhaps may think that, well, there shouldn't have been a statue erected to him in the first place, or they may think that the statue should be taken down. But that's very different from people taking, effectively, the law into their own hands. Now, as this was a jury verdict, it doesn't set a legal precedent, does it? It's not like we've not established a right that people have, say, if they don't like a statue, they can tear it down. That's not what's happened here. But there is a real concern that we have set a sort of a moral precedent where a lot of people will feel that if they think a monument is controversial or hateful, that they can just go and take it down with their own hands. What do you make of that?
That's not what the trial has ever been about. The trial has never been about whether it is right to pull down statues. The trial was about this statue in this city at this time, and it would be to overlook the significant features of this case, to generalize it and say it somehow gives permission for everyone everywhere to bring down statues.
But it does. I mean, it does. Why is this statue so much worse than this? What if someone decided they didn't like a statue of Winston Churchill? They thought he'd committed war crimes, or because he's alleged racism. What if they decided that a statue to any other world leader they didn't approve of? Lots of people feel very strongly about Margaret Thatcher. What about they decide to ransack a statue of her? I mean, it does set a moral precedent that if you don't like something, if you think it causes harm, you have a right to pull it down.
I would disagree. I think that misunderstands the significance of a jury decision. And again, it misunderstands the significance of the history in this case. It is important to remember that this was a statue of a slaver erected after his death, after the abolition of slavery, without any mention of his role in slavery, describing him as a wise and virtuous son of Bristol, where there had been decades, 100 years of protests about it, recognition publicly, after the event that it needed to come down. And in fact, you've talked about a plaque, something acknowledging his role in the slave trade. Well, attempts to do that were made and failed. They failed because of the vested interests of various people, including members of the Merchant Venturers Society, who after the event apologised for their role in that and recognised that it was the right thing for Bristol for it to come down.
But even if people we're in sort of Extinction Rebellion territory, where anyone who believes strongly about something can say, well, we've tried all the legal methods and we haven't managed to get through, so we're just going to take the matter into our own hands. Now, it's very different when someone is saying, if you're fighting for freedom as a black person in South Africa under apartheid, or if you're fighting for the right to vote as a woman, as a suffragette, in Britain, in the early 20th century, that's very different, isn't it? Because you haven't got the means to go through a legal process. But they still had the means to go through a legal process. There are lots of things I feel strongly about, but I don't take the law into my own hands. The jury are entitled to give their verdict. That's why we have jury trials, and I would not question their right to do that. I would question their judgment, but not their right. I wouldn't question the actual outcome of the verdict. But it is impossible for this not to set a moral precedent.
But again, that ignores the fact that in this case, the democratic processes simply failed.
To date, they had. But again, even if the democratic processes had failed, just because you don't get your way doesn't mean you get to just go outside the democratic processes and commit criminal damage. I mean, that's it. That's like saying, oh, well, I didn't get the government I want, so I don't have to obey this government.
But again, I think you're ignoring the details in this case, because it's not just about the statue, it's not just about the city, it's also about the time. We've got to remember that the toppling of the statue took place in the midst of a Black Lives Matter protest.
In that case,
the death of George Floyd, in a crowd who was standing around a statue of someone who had made their money from the trade.
Yeah, I understand the context. I remember watching it. I don't look, just because, again, lots of people felt very strongly about the statue and felt very strongly at the time about Black Lives Matter and very, very strongly at the time about George Floyd, again, doesn't give people the right to take the law into their own hands.
But Julia, it has never been the case that an acquittal for one offence means that every person out there believes that they are going to be able to get away with a similar offence. That's not how the criminal process works. And it ignores that this was a decision of 12 people of Bristol, having heard the evidence that they did in this case. It's to simplify what the trial process is about.
Okay, I don't think I'm simplifying it at all. I'm talking about the message that it sends out to give that argument. Wouldn't it have been better for those four, if they feel so strongly, they felt, no, it was worth what they did, and they knew the consequences of what they did, and they said, yeah, we did it, and we will live with the consequences, but we still think what we did was right. Jury, if they'd given a verdict of, yeah, guilty, but maybe they could have put a note to the judge saying, but we don't think there should be any punishment. I mean, if they felt it was such an important thing to do, they could have taken the consequences of it, couldn't they?
But I think this comes to the final question that the jury were asked to consider, which is whether a conviction in the circumstances was proportionate. Yeah. This was an action that took place in the heart of a protest, in the midst of a protest. Our clients were exercising their right to protest, and the law allows it to be left to the jury to decide whether, based on our clients' actions, a conviction was proportionate. The big question is whether a prosecution was proportionate, given the repeated failings of Bristol City Council to do anything about that statue, despite the harm that it was causing. How could it be proportionate for them to be prosecuted? And the jury clearly found it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, again, the jury are entitled to make their decision. I still find it an extraordinary verdict there. Really appreciate you joining us, Laura Brand.